Hello and welcome to the iTnews podcast, brought to you by Fusion 5. I'm Ry Crozier, Editor-in-Chief of iTnews. Stick around and hear the Fusion 5 approach to cloud migration, with insights from Chris Jackson, General Manager for Cloud Infrastructure and Security, on achieving reduced costs, improved security, and stronger governance through strategic planning and effective management. But first we hear from Eoghan Hogan, the recently former Transformation Director of Torrens University, on their learning management system transformation, which included a novel use of generative AI that is quite different to the ones we normally hear about.
Torrens University, Think Education and Media Design School are all part of our group. Torrens University are about 10 years old or just gone. During that time, we've gone from 0 to almost 20,000 students. We are a private university with campuses across South Australia, Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, and also catering for our online students.
So as a university that's been going for, a decade, can you talk a little bit about what's driven the need for transformation within the organisation? It feels like a fairly short time in which to build up something that will need transforming, but maybe I'm taking the wrong perspective on why transformation as a process or transformation as an initiative exists within Torrens.
It's a really good question. From conception, we have been a digital-first university. And with that, we've always been promoters of online education, learn anywhere, anytime, how you want, where you want. But with that, we've obviously had to have a strong digital foundation behind us, whether that's our student information systems or our learning management systems. But over the past few years, there's been other universities investing heavily in that area. And the need for transformation for us was really to get ahead of the game again and really show that we are leaders in the online delivery space and the digital learning space.
So just to break that down, can you talk a little bit more about the education model or the student experience? How much of it is done online? Are there any in-person classes?
There certainly are. So about 50% of our students are studying entirely online and about 50 face-to-face. But all of our students have access to our digital learning assets. So it doesn't matter where you're studying or how you're studying, all of our students have access to 7 hours of on-demand learning assets per week, and they're all delivered through the learning management system. And that's really our unique model. And that content is curated with subject matter experts, with learning designers, with web designers, really to meet the needs of our students. We all know there's content everywhere, but really we want to have the best content in the best web experience, and therefore our students are more likely to interact with it, and then it improves their learning. We've been ranked as 7th for overall quality of entire learning experience, and we are aiming to get in the top 5. And we know across the board students are looking for a more mobile friendly digital learning experience, and this is how we feel we can deliver on that.
And just in your role as leading transformation, does that put you in charge of making those technology decisions around what powers the online experience? How does it work internally in terms of the structure between sort of transformation and technology?
Yeah, so my role is predominantly within the digital transformation space. So I am involved in really looking at the holistic student and staff experience, understanding what their problems are and where we can make improvements. So that is across the board, while focusing on an improved digital learning experience. We're also working on cloud infrastructure at the moment, also looking at our student information system along with our student portal. So it is a holistic look, and we work hand in hand with our IT team on delivering those projects.
Now, you mentioned that one of the drivers of transformation is competition within the sector, and particularly a lot of the digital transformation that's gone on in other parts of the sector. Can you talk a little bit about what put Torrens on the path of digital transformation and elevate its own experience?
Yeah, so in 2019 is when we started to really look at what our digital experience was like then and really understanding where we wanted to get to in the future. So we actually underwent a 16-week discovery phase where we met with students, alumni, our competitors, to really understand what did their learning environment look like today, what did their digital environment look like today, and what were they looking for from those digital experiences. So what we learned from that is we got 1,800 requirements back from those stakeholders. And what we started to understand is that what we were delivering and what all universities were delivering may not necessarily have been what our students were looking for. We heard lots of things like superior UX UI. Why couldn't this be on par of some of the Apple experiences, as an example, that they're used to interacting with? Students wanted video first, and we see that through some of the social media platforms and the engagement within those. Students told us mobile responsiveness was key, and they found themselves wanting to learn, whether on the bus or when they were traveling, and having that experience just was something that they saw as critical moving forward. Students told us they wanted things like persistent chat, access to their facilitators through that chat, and be able to create digital social communities with other students. So really, I think the most important part of this project was actually the discovery phase, to understand where is higher education going and how can we be leaders in that space.
So you mentioned there 1,800 requirements came out of the discovery phase. How do you boil that down or package that up into something that you're then able to put into practice or to implement?
That was probably one of the hardest parts of the project. What can we honestly achieve within the time frame we've given ourselves? So those 1,800, not all of those were met through the project that ended up being MyLearn. Some of those got split out into a student portal project that's currently ongoing in the background, and others then sat within other parts of the overall ecosystem. I think what's really interesting is when you give people a platform to give feedback, you get feedback on almost every interaction they have with the university. And our role was really to put those into different buckets and understand which ones were achievable within the MyLearn project, and then put some of them in the downstream projects.
Let's just talk a little bit more about the MyLearn project. And I guess to understand the MyLearn project, we probably need to step back a little bit and talk about learning management systems. So I think, if I'm correct, you're going to migrate from Blackboard onto MyLearn as a learning management system?
Yeah, correct. So we are moving off Blackboard and onto Canvas and Microsoft Teams in a platform we have coined as MyLearn. The reason we've created that MyLearn brand is that we've really integrated Microsoft Teams and the applications within Microsoft Teams within the Canvas experience using Svelte pages and other. One thing students told us in that discovery is that they didn't want multiple different platforms to do multiple different things. They were getting confused about the journey that we were putting them on, whether that was a different chat platform, whether that was a different video conferencing platform. Really what they wanted is that kind of one single platform, and then for us to really build their learning around that. So we've created our MyLearn, being Canvas and Teams as the core, and then we obviously have some periphery platforms around that, whether that be our library or video sharing tools that scaffold that experience.
I understand that you also went through a bit of an analysis process of the learning management system or the online learning environment. So this is in addition to the scoping exercise. This is more looking at what you could actually change or what needed to be changed. Can you talk us through a little bit about what you did and what you found?
Yeah, so we have over 1,200 subjects in the university. Within those subjects, they, as I mentioned, have been all developed with subject matter experts, with learning experience designers, and with web designers. But they've been developed over a 3 to 5 year period. And we found multiple variances between those subjects. Something students were telling us is that they wanted consistency across the subjects they were studying. We also found that there was 60,000 web pages of that curated content. And different templates had wasted real estate. At times, students needed to download PDFs as opposed to being previewed. We found that the branding and colouring within some of those pages was very different. And just overall, the look and feel was quite dated. It didn't live up to that kind of true superior UX UI experience that students were asking for. I think along with that, that mobile experience was limited. We had areas within the HTML text that had tables, and some of the functionality just wasn't scalable for mobile. And really, that was some of the things we were hoping to address through this project.
You mentioned variances across subjects. Can you explain a little bit more about what kind of variances? Is this just in the way that the different subjects were designed and presented to students because they were done by different people over a number of years, or is there something else?
Exactly that. Really, it was the UX UI within those web pages, whether that was where they could find certain learning assets, where the videos were placed, where the activities were found. Really, the templates within those designs were different. And I think it was partly got to do with time frame of when they've been worked on, because obviously as a web design team, they were constantly updating and building on the previous version of the template. But obviously then over time you have legacy subjects. So although the content has been frequently updated, the actual look and feel of the web page was not necessarily being updated during that time.
A good opportunity, I think, to talk about how you've used Azure OpenAI as part of this scoping exercise or project. Do you want to talk a little bit about where it came in or where it fits in?
Yeah, look, so the project overall, we knew we had to migrate the content from Blackboard to Canvas. But with that, we would love to be able to provide an uplift in that look and feel, UX, UI, and really be able to deliver on some of those requirements that were sent through from our staff and students. But when we looked at that, to do that in the traditional manual way, we could see that it was going to cost about $2.4 million. But the money wasn't the biggest barrier. We also knew it was going to take about 20,000 hours of human time. And that was a mix of learning designers, subject matter experts, and our web design team. And we really couldn't afford that time when we looked at how quickly we were planning to move over learning management systems. So within that, that's where our amazing team came in. Some of them spent some time ideating, really understanding the problem we have. And then they came back one day in one of our meetings and said, hey, why don't we try to use AI to actually uplift this content? And I think one of my first questions was, has this been done before? And I think the answer was no. And I think I asked, can it be done? And they were saying they weren't too sure. But I think that's one of the great things about the team, is that even knowing that it hadn't been done and we weren't sure if it could be done, really giving them the opportunity to trial it and to figure out, try and solve the problem for us. So I'm delighted to say we, using GPT-3 and 3.5 at the time, we started to get some success rate, but not really to the superior look and feel that we were looking for.
So just explain a little bit more about what you're doing there with OpenAI. So you're actually using the model to look for commonality in the problems or potentially standardization opportunities across this kind of swathe of content?
Yeah, there was a couple of steps involved. So the first step was we built a bot to scrape and identify the current content. So what I mean by that is that we were looking for, where's the heading? Where is their images? Where are their videos? Where are their subheadings? Where are the journal articles, PDFs, links to scholarly articles, etc. Using AI to scrape through that content, identify where it was. And once we had that identified, then it was, okay, how can we use prompt engineering to overlay a new UX UI design? So removing wasted real estate, reorganizing the content. Students told us that video was the first thing they went to within the content. It's actually bringing that right up to the top of their introduction page within each module. Then we had things like, how could we bring in new branding? How could we bring in new color design? How could we make it more responsive, removing tables, etc.? So essentially, that was a huge piece of work in actually getting that prompt engineering right. So with the first step, as we've discussed, I think we picked up on the variances, and then you almost had to do slightly different prompt engineering to identify and scrape the content. But once we had that, then you had to really work on the prompts so that you could get a consistent feel on the output that it was creating. I think one of the really important things within this journey was to ensure we had a human in the loop. We were using the generative AI to identify and to uplift those learning assets and to bring in that kind of new, superior UX UI design within the web pages. But we did have a QA process at the end, and that was an internal QA process within our transformation team. But then equally, we had our subject matter experts come in and ensure that the content itself hadn't changed and was still consistent with what they had created with our product innovation team. And once that build sign off, as we call it, was complete, the subjects went live to students. Really happy to say that the outcome has been achieved, and I think that's just down to the huge work that we've done internally, but equally the support we've had from Microsoft.
So you used it firstly to identify the objects in the pages that you had, and then secondly to move those objects around, but you move them around in a way that you've agreed some sort of standardization in terms of the templates for these pages in the future.
Yeah, move them around, bring in a new CSS look and feel, and I suppose organize the content in the way students asked for it.
So I'm wondering, how did AI even come up in this context? How did it even come up in conversation as something that might be conducive to doing this?
Yeah, so we started out in our AI journey kind of end of 2022. We have an amazing AI and machine learning engineer, Sari, who'd been playing around with it in collaboration with Carlos Dominguez and Angelo Estoc. And I think between them, they'd created, like most people have, a bot that students were interacting with for support. But really, they came back and said, we feel like we can develop something that can do this manual work in a more automated way. Now, obviously, we would have human in the loop at the end from a QA perspective, but we feel like it can do this manual rote work for us. They went away and they started trialing it. As I said, they worked on GPT-3 and 3.5 at the time, which were within the Azure AI Studio. Again, really important to us that our content was safe and remained our content, and Microsoft gave us that security. So as they worked through that problem, as they got about a 30 to 40% success rate with 3 and 3.5, really we weren't getting to where we felt it could solve the problem for us. I think timing was on our side, and 4 just came live, unfortunately not in Australia. So we rang up Microsoft and thankfully they provided us with early access to 4, and that's where the project really took off. I think working with Microsoft, and they helped us by bringing in a prompt engineer to provide some support. We started to see where we were getting a 90 to 95% success rate very quickly within this work. And that's when we finally realized that we can potentially do this across 200-300 subjects and save us a huge amount of money, but really save us a huge amount of time and provide that superior experience the students were looking for.
Obviously, you've got up to a very high success rate there in terms of the ability of the model through a mixture of internal and Microsoft support. Can you talk about where you're at now in terms of the MyLearn project itself?
We've now completed the first phase of the project. We have been able to achieve 100% mobile responsiveness within our content. Another outcome which we're just delighted about, and something we didn't realize at the start, but we've been able to achieve WACG 2.0 from an inclusion and accessibility perspective. We've also been able to improve the UX UI consistency, and we're going to have improved maintenance in the future. One of the great things from the project is that students have provided us amazing feedback. In our recent surveys, we've heard things like everything is easily accessible, which is not necessarily something you would have heard previously. They've been telling us things like much improved look and feel, should have done it sooner. It was one of the funnier ones that came out. The user interface is easy to use, and students have told us that 85% of them were very happy with accessing and finding their class materials. And we're happy to say that now we have 60% of our students are using mobile to access resources, which is just something that wouldn't have been possible in the past.
I think you recently did a study tour in the US and took in a few different AI platforms. Is that right?
We're invited over by Microsoft to Seattle to discuss generative AI in higher education and where it was going. And while there, we also had the opportunity to visit Google in Reston to discuss Gemini and where they saw Gemini within the higher education space.
Just briefly, can you give us 1 or 2 key takeaways from that? Obviously, a lot of your peers are on this similar journey or looking in a similar space, and I'm sure would be interested.
Yeah, I think where we're all looking is how generative AI can be used to provide better student support. I think to provide that kind of personalized student support, we're all working to make sure our data is in the right order. And I think at the moment, that's probably one of our biggest struggles. I think main takeaways from that trip were just these tools are going to provide amazing opportunity for both staff and students from a research and learning and teaching perspective. But it's so important to make sure you use them right. We heard so many stories of where universities in the US had 15 different bots which students could access at any time, and they each did something different. I think one of the takeaways from me was to make sure you have consistency and make sure you're not further confusing the student journey. I also think from a back-end function, how we can use it to be more productive, whether that's within the curation of a personalized learning journey for students, whether that's really meeting their needs in terms of the subject selection. Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. And again, these models are all developing fast. I think while we were on that trip, there were almost 2 releases from Microsoft. So I really see in the next year, when things settle down a little bit, really delving into some of the new models and understanding how they can be used to aid the student experience.
And it sounds like as well, perhaps either consecutively or in association with the existing work, there might be some work to come around data infrastructure and also data preparation, which wouldn't be out of place with most organizations that are going down this path.
Yeah, exactly. From our perspective, really focusing on that data governance, data foundation is where we're at the moment. And one of the other projects within the transformation office at the moment, we're almost there. I think it really depends then what you want to give your generative AI bot access to support students. And that's where our focus is at the moment. And as soon as we can understand that, then we're happy to go live. We are doing a trial at the moment within our business vertical where students actually have a generative AI bot within the learning management system. So it's within their core content and they're already starting to use it to support their studies, support their assessments. We're working hand in hand with the learning facilitator, with the students to understand, is it aiding their learning? How are they using it and how can it be improved? As soon as that pilot's complete, we do plan to roll it out to a broader audience.
There are countless reasons to move to the cloud, but if you want the benefits of lower cost, improved security and stronger governance, then how you get there can be just as important as why you're going. According to Chris Jackson, General Manager for Cloud, Infrastructure and Security at the IT solutions provider Fusion 5, there are 3 key factors that should be considered ahead of any cloud migration.
To start with, make sure that you really understand your workloads in your environment. Take the time to step back and actually leverage the assessment frameworks, but also working with partners that know that assessment framework and make sure that you understand each of the moving pieces. It's important to understand how long you'll need that application for. Is it going to be 3 years? Is it 5 years? And how static is that? And will it be really the best choice to go into the cloud? The second thing is we need to make sure that you realize that every single minute of a service that's running in the cloud is charged. And so this is something that is understood at a high level when going on your cloud migration journey, but something that is easily forgotten. The third thing is your business really ready to support workloads in the cloud? Do they have the right skill sets? Do they have the right knowledge around cloud constructs and what's required from a governance perspective and control, but also from an internal perspective, do you understand how the billing will work? So if you've got certain teams in your organization that are using more cloud services, how can they be invoiced internally for that time so that you can get a really good control of your costs and understand where that cost is coming from?
With these questions answered, it becomes possible to create a migration strategy that delivers real savings.
The real cost benefits come from having the right foundation in place, so having that landing zone there, the right safeguards in place, and controlling the migration ways and services. But once they're actually in the cloud, making sure that your team's ready to automate the operational activities, because that's really where you get your real return on investment when you go to cloud. There's also been numerous occasions where companies have migrated workloads that are not really fit for the cloud, and therefore they're static. They're not going to move the high compute, the high storage requirements, and therefore if you look at running that in the cloud for 3 to 5 years, then the total commercial investment is very high. So it's important to understand those workloads, where they sit, how they communicate with each other, and is the benefit of the cloud outweigh the cost investment?
While the focus is often on the technical side of migration, Jackson cautions that there are 2 other considerations to keep in mind.
On the people side, we want to look at how their skills are different in terms of what they need in the future versus what they are skilled on today, how they transition successfully from working on premises into a cloud environment, what training they need and what communication plans can be put in place to address that change effectively. And then on the governance side, so one of the number one things that comes from lack of governance is exposure to risk, but also then cost blowouts. And so introducing enforced policies and guardrails is really important, but also ensuring that you're managing an ongoing control of that risk in the environment. And one of the examples I have for this is a large winery business in Australia. After the solution was designed and migrated and we handed that back over to their internal team, due to the lack of understanding of their skills, but also their understanding of the cloud constructs, it led to the creation of services that perhaps weren't aligned to best practices, and then that led to about 3 months of cost blowout following. So it's really important to address the people side, the governance side, and enable the team internally to look after those services.
Doing this groundwork also raises the likelihood of achieving more sophisticated benefits.
When you're in a cloud construct, one of the major benefits is that you can leverage what we call infrastructure as code. So that's moving away from ClickOps, which is referred to as someone going into a portal and clicking through different activities, to then being more scripted and governed. And what that enables your team to deliver is consistency in their approach to managing cloud constructs, but also automation around creation of new environments. And so it's key to understand how your team's going to operate within the new environment and what tools they're going to use to be able to leverage that automation.
This groundwork can also provide the foundations for a more secure and well-governed environment.
Time and time again, when we are migrating or assessing workloads that are on-premise, we observe that the source environments are in a higher risk state, or they could be uncontrolled, and they have been for some time. And so the benefits of moving to a cloud or a hybrid cloud structure is that you can redesign the foundations. You can align it to standards and frameworks such as the well-architected framework, and it means that you can remove and reduce the amount of risk that's in the environment. And a lot of people for years have stated that cloud is risky because it's in another data center, but there's many examples of where a destination that's in the cloud is or even more secure because there's better solutions in place, there's better foundation, and there's also better access to security tooling and visibility for those services.
To learn more about maximising the value of your cloud migration, please go to www.fusion5.com.au. More details can be found in the description of this podcast.
That's it for this fortnight's episode. Let us know what you think by reviewing the iTnews podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcast from. Your feedback is greatly appreciated and helps us create better content catered to you, the listener. And don't forget, for all the latest headlines and happenings in Australian technology news, head over to itnews.com.au.